You a civilian mechanic in a SEAL zone? You're so useless even your wrench refuses to obey you. He said it with a sneer as the crew watched her crouched by the flickering control panel. None of them knew the quiet woman had once commanded the very SEAL unit they worshipped. When a spark flared, she pulled up her sleeve, revealing the Trident Eclipse Insignia, the classified mark reserved for operators officially declared dead 3 years ago. The commander froze color draining from his face. He had signed the order that buried that unit, and now he'd just insulted its last living member. Auric Denholm's face did not just lose color, it became a slack waxen mask of disbelief, his mind scrambling to recatalog the impossible image of the insignia. He signed the damn death certificate. He had overseen the digital purge. The Trident Eclipse belonged to the deep-water floor, to ash, to oblivion. His polished voice, so ready with the next insult, became caught in his throat like broken glass. He instinctively took a massive heavy step backward, knocking his forearm against the flickering control panel Rhea had just stabilized. The resulting surge of static that crackled from the console was less shocking than the sight of that silver ink. He had to assume it was a replica. A crude, audacious lie tattooed on a useless civilian, a pathetic attempt at intimidation. It must be, he told himself, straightening his back with a jerk that restored the rigid military posture, his eyes now narrowed into slits of lethal suspicion. His public ego demanded this be crushed immediately, or the memory of the Valdrith mission and his subsequent rise to power would crumble beneath the quiet weight of her silence. He watched her pull the sleeve down the fabric, smothering the truth, and he felt a cold, sharp panic that had nothing to do with naval security and everything to do with personal survival. Rhea Soltrin didn't look up. Her hands kept moving steady, as ever tightening a bolt on the panel. The spark died out, and the hum of the system stabilized. She was 31 with dark hair pulled back in a plain ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry, just a faded gray jumpsuit that made her look like any other technician on the Valenreach base. The crew around her shifted, some smirking, others whispering. They didn't know her, didn't know what she'd carried for years. To them, she was just the new girl who didn't belong in their icy, steel-walled world. The North Atlantic wind howled outside, rattling the base's metal frame, but Rhea's focus didn't waver. She wiped her hands on a rag stood and pulled her sleeve back down. Not a word, not a glance, but the air in the room had changed. The control room was all sharp edges and cold light monitors glowing white against the steel walls. Commander Auric Denholm stood at the center, 47 years old, broad-shouldered with a chest full of medals he never let anyone forget. His voice carried the weight of a man who'd once led battles, but now leaned hard into his rank, his ego polished brighter than his boots. He stepped closer to Rhea, his boots clicking on the floor. "What's this, Soltrin? You think you're saving the day? This isn't a garage. You're in my house now." His eyes flicked to the crew, fishing for laughs. A few obliged. Owen Cale, the chief technician, snorted loudest. He was 36, wiry with a permanent scowl, and hands that always looked greasy like he wore his job as a badge of superiority. "She's probably here to mop the floors after we're done," Owen said, leaning against a console, arms crossed. Rhea didn't flinch. She set her wrench down, deliberate like she was placing a chess piece. Her eyes met Auric's for a half-second, calm, but unyielding. "The panel's fixed," she said. Her voice was quiet, steady, like she was stating a fact to someone who'd already made up their mind. Auric's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being answered, not by someone like her, someone who looked like she'd wandered in from a supply ship. "Fixed," he said, stepping closer, his shadow falling over her. "You think I need your permission to know what's fixed? Get back to your corner, civilian." The word civilian dripped with contempt like it was a curse. The crew's laughter grew a low rumble that echoed off the walls. Rhea picked up her toolbox, her movement slow, precise. She didn't argue, didn't explain. She just walked away, her boots soft against the floor, leaving the room to their noise. 5 minutes after Rhea's quiet exit, Commander Denholm decided to reassert his authority by validating her supposed fix on the communications panel. He stepped forward, his expression severe, ordering Owen to run a full diagnostic sweep on the newly stabilized connection. As Owen began the sequence, Auric, needing to demonstrate his own superior knowledge, jammed his finger onto a separate unlabeled auxiliary port control, insisting that the mechanic had misaligned the frequency damper. The resulting catastrophic circuit feedback did not affect the comms system Rhea had repaired, but instead caused the base's internal biometric security lock on the armory to temporarily fail blinking red and triggering an immediate security lockdown siren that was not part of the drill protocol. Arik immediately began shouting orders to cover his error, blaming the lingering civilian interference for the systemic failure, while his own hand trembled subtly near the misused control. The security chief sprinted into the room, demanding answers for the uncommanded breach, forcing Arik to abandon his pursuit of Rhea for the moment, leaving a tangible trail of high-level incompetence in her wake. Lieutenant Mara Quill watched from the edge of the room. She was 28, sharp-eyed with a sleek braid, and a uniform so crisp it looked like it had been ironed 5 minutes ago. Mara was Arik's right hand, the kind of officer who could calculate missile trajectories in her head, but still smiled like she was selling you something. She leaned toward Owen, her voice low. "She's got no business here. Why'd they even send her?" Owen shrugged, wiping his hands on his jumpsuit. "Probably a diversity quota. You know how it goes." Mara's lips twitched, not quite a smile. She didn't like Rhea, but something about the way Rhea moved, too calm, too controlled, made her pause. It was like watching someone who knew the room better than the room knew itself. The next morning, the base was buzzing with the first inspection of the week. The Spectral 9 submarines were lined up in their docks, black and sleek, their hulls glinting under the harsh lights. Rhea was at her station checking a sonar module. Her hands moved fast like they'd done this 1,000 times. The module was fritzing, sending out static that could throw off a sub's navigation. She traced the wiring her fingers, finding the fault in seconds. But before she could finish, Arik's voice cut through the hum of the bay. "Soltrin, you holding up my crew because you can't figure out a wire." He strode over his face, red, his metals catching the light. The crew around her stopped, their tools clattering to a halt. "Maybe you should stick to changing light bulbs," he said loud enough for the whole bay to hear. "This is a SEAL base, not a community college." Owen was right behind him, grinning like a kid who just won a bet. "Told you, Commander, she's out of her league. 1 week she's gone." The other technicians chuckled, their eyes darting to Rhea. She didn't look up. Her hands kept working, stripping a wire, reconnecting it. "The sonar's off by 3 degrees. She said, her voice even like she was reading a manual. "It's fixed now." Arik's smile vanished. He leaned in, his breath hot on her ear. "You don't tell me what's fixed, Soltrin. You don't tell me anything. In this world, silence means you're nothing." Rhea's hands paused just for a second. She looked at him, her eyes steady like she was measuring something. "Then why are you still talking?" she said. The bay went quiet. Arik's face froze, his mouth half open. He didn't have a comeback. Not yet. Owen Cale humiliated by the silence that followed. Rhea's icy counter retaliated later that afternoon by altering a core component of the sub-docking bay's hydrostatic pressure regulator. This was a sophisticated piece of equipment, and instead of obvious sabotage, Owen made a microscopic adjustment to the fluid viscosity calibration, a change only detectable by someone with an almost intuitive understanding of deep-sea physics. He left a cryptic, greasy note stuck to the component that read simply, "Solve that mechanic." When Rhea discovered the deliberately destabilized regulator, she didn't call for a supervisor or report the sabotage. She simply crouched her body, forming a tight, focused sphere of professional calm amidst the noise of the busy bay. Her fingers, fine-tuned tools in their own right, began the painstaking process of micro-recalibration, using a set of specialized, unlabeled shims from her kit that no civilian would possess. The only sign of her fury was the minute tightening of the muscles in her jaw as she brought the immense, complex system back from the brink of implosion, her action, a silent, technically brilliant rebuttal to Owen's petty malice. The tension broke when an alarm blared, red lights flashing across the bay. A simulated emergency standard for a base like Valenreach, but it felt real every time. The crew scrambled, shouting orders, boots pounding on the steel floor. The sonar system was locked, screens showing nothing but static. Arik barked commands, his voice booming over the chaos. "Get that system up, now." The technicians fumbled, their hands shaking as they tried to reset the controls. Rhea didn't hesitate. She slid to the main console, her fingers flying over the keys. 6 minutes later, the screens flickered back to life, green and steady. The crew stared, mouths open. Mara, standing by the door, blinked hard. "How'd you do that?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "You got SEAL-level access." Rhea didn't look at her. She wiped her hands on her jumpsuit. "I just know the system," she said. On the screen behind her, a log flashed briefly. Protocol Ghost Line 7 executed. Nobody noticed, except Mara. Mara Quill couldn't shake the image of the flickering screen and the single split-second glimpse of Protocol Ghost Line 7 executed. Back at her own secure terminal, she bypassed standard query logs and burrowed deep into the system's archived, unverified internal server commands. What she found chilled her: a phantom user profile logged under an alphanumeric signature that had existed for only 3 years, exactly the period since the Ghostline incident, with access privileges that technically exceeded the commander's. The profile was tied to a temporary Valenreach guest key, but its last activity was not a maintenance log, but a massive instantaneous decryption and subsequent re-encryption of the entire base communication matrix executed just moments before Rhea stabilized the sonar. This action wasn't just technical genius. It was an act of covert, high-level operational security. Mara didn't alert Auric. Instead, she copied the log data to a private air-gapped drive, her hands moving with a new hesitant respect for the woman she had previously dismissed. That night, Rhea sat alone in the mess hall, a tray of cold coffee and a half-eaten sandwich in front of her. The room was empty, the hum of the base's generators the only sound. She stared at her coffee, her fingers tracing the edge of her sleeve. Underneath, hidden, was the Trident Eclipse, a silver and black tattoo wings curling around a trident, sharp and unmistakable. She'd gotten it after her last mission, the one that ended with her team gone, their names erased from every record. She could still hear their voices sometimes late at night when the base was too quiet. A laugh from Jensen, a joke from Carter, the way Maya used to hum, off-key. Rhea's jaw tightened. She pushed the tray away, stood and walked out, her boots echoing in the empty hall. The next day, Auric called a meeting in the strategy room. The air was thick with tension, the kind that comes when someone's about to get torn apart. Rhea stood at the back, her arms crossed her jumpsuit still smudged with oil. Auric slammed a report on the table, his eyes on her. "You think you can just waltz in here and play hero?" He said, his voice loud enough to carry across the room. "You access classified protocols. That's a court-martial offense." Mara stood nearby, her arms crossed her face, unreadable. "No one has Ghostline codes unless they're dead," she said, her tone icy like she was daring Rhea to slip up. The other officers in the room, men and women in crisp uniforms, their faces smug or bored, watched like it was a show. One of them, a young lieutenant with a slick haircut and a Rolex, leaned back in his chair. "Maybe she's a spy," he said, half joking, half not. The room laughed a sharp, cruel sound. Rhea's hand stayed steady, folding a piece of paper she'd been holding. "You done?" she asked, her voice low, cutting through the noise. The room went still. Auric's eyes narrowed, but he waved her out. "You're done here, Sultran. Hand over your badge." She set the badge on the table, turned and walked out. As the door closed, Auric's voice echoed after her. "If you were a real soldier, you'd be dead like the rest of them." As Rhea turned to leave the strategy room, Auric's voice followed her, not loud this time, but sharp, with malicious, calculated intent. He deliberately detailed the mission's catastrophic end, savoring the syllables. "I read the field report, Sultran. The final transmission wasn't a distress call. It was silent air. They found nothing but wreckage. They were scattered so far across the North Sea they had to call off the retrieval operation because there were no remains left to retrieve." He paused, letting the grim image hang in the air, a final cruel psychological strike aimed to dismantle her composure. "And you know who authorized that decision I did? I made the call to classify them all as vapor erased from existence just so this unit could finally move on without the stench of failure." He took a slow, deliberate breath. "Your ghosts are quiet now, and they'll stay that way. Run along, civilian. You have nothing left to mourn but your foolish pride." The room watched, expecting a crack, a flinch, but Rhea only paused at the doorway, her head slightly bowed, a shadow momentarily obscuring her face before she pushed the door open and vanished without response. Rhea didn't stop walking. Her boots hit the steel floor, steady, unhurried. She made her way to her bunk, a small room with a single cot and a metal locker. The walls were bare except for a small photo taped to the inside of the locker door, her old team smiling, arms around each other, the Trident Eclipse patches on their uniforms glinting in the sunlight. She didn't look at it long. She sat at her desk, pulled out a burner phone, and opened a coded message, "Stay under. Traders in the strategy room." Her fingers paused, then typed a quick reply. "Understood." She slipped the phone back into her bag, her movements smooth like she'd done this before. Too many times. She opened her laptop, her fingers moving fast, coding a trace to track data leaks. The screen flickered, and for a moment the Trident Eclipse symbol flashed a glitch, or maybe a reminder. She kept working her face calm, her hands steady. Rhea waited for a full 90 minutes after Mara's hurried exit, ensuring the technician's presence had not triggered any further system monitoring. Then, pulling a small fiber optic cable from the lining of her toolbox, she connected it to a hidden diagnostic port on the underside of her metal cot. The terminal displayed a detailed topographical map of the Valen Reach base overlaid with faint red grid lines indicating wireless choke points. For weeks, every piece of maintenance she had performed, every fixed panel, every adjusted sensor had contained a tiny passive radio frequency ID tag, acting as a beacon. She wasn't just fixing the base, she was mapping its internal nervous system, turning the very infrastructure Auric relied upon into a communication relay for her real mission. Her fingers danced across the holographic map, selecting 3 specific maintenance nodes, one in the mess hall, one near the armory, and one beneath Auric's office, and remotely activating their deep sleep burst transmission mode. The system silently confirmed the new configuration, creating a secure, untraceable communication pathway known only to her and the outside operational command. The base didn't sleep, but the nights were quieter, the hum of the generators softer. Rhea worked late, her desk littered with tools and circuit boards. She was tracking a leak-classified data slipping out through a back door in the system. She'd found the source Owen Cale's terminal. His logins didn't match his work hours. She planted a reverse trace, a small piece of code that would flag any outgoing transmissions. As she typed, the door creaked. Mara stepped in, her braid loose from a long day, her eyes sharp. "You're still here," Mara said, glancing at the screen. Rhea didn't flinch. She clicked to a log file, just a list of maintenance notes. "Just finishing up," she said, her voice flat. Mara's eyes lingered on the screen, where the Trident Eclipse symbol had flashed for a split second. She didn't say anything. But she didn't leave right away either. The next morning, Auric announced a full-scale drill. The bay was chaos crews running alarms, blaring the Spectral 9 subs prepped for a mock run. Auric handed Rhea a diagnostic tablet, his smirk sharp. "Don't screw this up, Soltron. It's not a light bulb." The tablet was rigged, wrong specs, outdated firmware. When she powered it up, it crashed, the screen flashing errors. The crew groaned, some swearing under their breath. Auric's voice cut through the noise. "I told you she's the glitch in this system." Owen piled on his face, red with glee. "If this was real, we'd all be dead because of her." The bay echoed with laughter, harsh and biting. Rhea's hands gripped the tablet, her knuckles white. She set it down, slow, deliberate. Auric leaned in, his voice a low hiss. "You don't belong in that uniform." She looked at him, her eyes like steel. Then, "Why's it fit me better than yours?" The words landed like a slap. The bay went quiet, the crew frozen, waiting for Auric's next move. He didn't have one. After the drill, Rhea headed to the maintenance bay, her steps heavy. She pulled off her gloves to clean oil from her hands, her sleeves slipping just enough to show a glint of silver ink on her wrist. Mara, passing by, stopped dead. "Is that Trident Eclipse?" she asked, her voice low, like she'd seen a ghost. Rhea tugged her sleeve down, her face blank. "Just old ink," she said, her tone cold enough to end the conversation. Mara didn't push, but later in her quarters, she pulled up classified files on her secure tablet. Ghost Line 7, status KIA. Every member dead. Except one file was redacted, the name blacked out. Mara's fingers froze on the screen. She remembered Auric's signature on the mission report, the one that called Valdrith a failure. Her stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. Mara spent the remainder of the evening wrestling with the redacted file, the single ghost-like trace of a survivor she'd discovered. The weight of Auric's betrayal, the calculated clinical way he spoke of the vaporized team, hit her with sickening force. She closed her tablet, her face etched with a sudden sharp clarity of purpose. She had a mandatory system update scheduled for the following morning, a task Arik had assigned her personally to install on all secure consoles. Instead of the scheduled patch, Mara swiftly coded a lightweight stealth subroutine. The next day, under the guise of the update, she uploaded this subroutine into every network terminal in the strategy room, including Arik's and the lieutenant with the slick hair. This subroutine did not retrieve data. It did the opposite. It created a temporary, highly localized network void, a 10-second gap, that would automatically drop all terminal connections to the outside world the moment an unauthorized outbound data packet was detected, a silent digital ambush designed to freeze any in-progress data leak and giving a hidden observer just enough time to react. The next day, Arik called Rhea to his office. The room was all steel and glass, his desk covered in neatly stacked reports. He stood, his face hard, his metals gleaming. "What game are you playing, Soltran?" he said, his voice low, dangerous. He grabbed her arm, yanked up her sleeve. The trident eclipse stared back silver wings, sharp trident, undeniable. The room went silent, the air heavy. Arik's voice shook. "No. Ghost Line 7 is gone. All of them." He stepped closer, his eyes wild. "You're a fraud?" Rhea didn't move. Her arm stayed steady, the tattoo gleaming under the light. "You sure about that?" she said, her voice calm, like she was asking about the weather. Arik's face went pale. He let go of her arm, his hand trembling. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. That night, Rhea sent a signal from her burner phone. Target confirmed. She sat back, her hands still, her breath even. The base was quiet, the North Atlantic wind howling outside. She heard boots in the hall, heavy, deliberate. The door swung open and a SEAL team stepped in, black gear faces, hard moving like they owned the place. Their leader, a tall man with gray in his beard, gave Rhea a quick hand signal. "Commander Ghostline," he said, his voice low, respectful. The room shifted. Owen, standing nearby, fumbled his tablet, his face white. A screen behind him lit up, showing data logs, his data logs sent to an offshore server. He stammered, pointing at Arik. "He told me to do it." The SEALs didn't blink. They cuffed Owen, then turned to Arik. Cameras in the corner blinked red, replaying footage Arik taking a briefcase of cash from a shadowed figure. His face went gray, his metals dull under the light. When the SEALs moved to cuff Commander Denholm, Arik erupted in a frantic, desperate surge of physical resistance. He didn't fight the operators. He focused his entire enraged energy on Rhea, lunging across the room with a guttural, furious cry that echoed the destruction of his career. His hand, heavy and blunt, snatched a 2-foot-long, specialized tactical blade, kept sheathed discreetly on the wall for emergency tool access. He swung the cold steel towards Rhea's head, aiming to eliminate the sole living witness to his corruption in a final, panicked act of self-preservation. Rhea's hands, which had just sent the signal, did not rise to block. Instead, with a fluid, blindingly fast movement that defied her civilian clothes, she dropped low, pivoted on the ball of her foot, and executed a perfect sweeping ankle hook that brought the powerful man crashing down to the steel floor in a violent, rattling collision. The blade clattered harmlessly away, and Arik, winded and stunned, found his face inches from the floor. His eyes locked on the Commander SEAL Recon Unit 7 patch on the lead operator's shoulder. A final, horrifying realization of the depth of his miscalculation before the SEALs secured the cuffs on his wrists. Arik didn't go quietly. As the SEALs cuffed him, he twisted, his voice raw. "You think you've won, Soltran? No one trusts a ghost." Mara, standing by the door, stepped forward, her braid tight, her eyes steady. "I trust her," she said. "I saw how she led without a title." Arik laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You'll die like your team, Soltran." Rhea turned, her eyes like ice. "They didn't die for nothing. You did." Arik's head dropped, his eyes locked on her tattoo glinting under the cold light. The SEALs pulled him out. His boots dragging on the steel floor. The room emptied, the air heavy with what had just happened. The next morning, the Spectral 9 sub left the dock, its hull cutting through the icy water. Rhea stood on the deck, her new uniform crisp, the Commander SEAL Recon Unit 7 patch sewn on her shoulder. The wind whipped her hair, but she didn't move. Mara approached, her boots clicking, and gave a sharp salute. "Commander," she said, her voice steady. A radio crackled, Admiral Rourke's voice coming through, mission complete. Ghostline lives. Rhea's hand tightened on her sleeve, the trident eclipse catching the light. She looked out at the horizon, her voice low. No one's useless, just people who forgot they were soldiers. Owen's name hit the news a week later. Fired, disgraced, his clearance revoked. Posts on X lit up exposing his side deals, his accounts frozen. Arik's fall was quieter, but heavier. Stripped of rank, his medals boxed up his name, erased from the base's honor roll. The lieutenant with the Rolex lost his sponsorship deal, his face gone from the base's social feeds. Mara stayed on, promoted her braid tighter, her eyes sharper. Rhea didn't look back. She didn't need to. The truth was out heavy as the steel walls around her. The base felt different now. Quieter, but not peaceful. The crew moved fast, their eyes down, their voices low. Rhea walked through the bay, her steps steady, her toolbox light in her hand. No one laughed, no one whispered. Her sleeve stayed down, but the weight of the trident eclipse was there, silent, undeniable. She'd carried it alone for years. Now it carried her. You've been through it. The looks, the words, the moments when the world tried to make you small. You weren't wrong to keep going. You weren't alone in that fight. Rhea carried her truth in silence, and it spoke louder than any shout. So can yours. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.